So now let's go ahead and cover one more process that you probably want to know, and I want you to be aware of them. And then we're gonna go into the final thing that I wanna show you, that is how do you move between a sketch or something like a Dynamesh object that we have here and maintain all the details that you've done in that sort of sketching process or a sketching stage, and get to a stage that you have a clean topology, but also maintaining some of the details so you don't have to do everything again. So it's gonna make more sense in just a second. So to wrap up this introduction to the pillars of sculpting, let's go ahead and select the teeth here. And we can just go ahead and let's go into solo mode. We can go ahead and divide these multiple times and have 5 subdivision levels, and boom, we have something really nice and clean. That's it. We don't need to do anything else. However, if I undo all of this, you also have the ability to enable dynamic subdivision. So I'm going to open this one up here in the geometry palette. I'm going to hold the Control and the Alt key. I'm going to drag dynamic, and I'm going to put it in maybe around here, because it's kind of like the process that I would use before I get to subdivision, if anything. I'm also going to bring in this apply button. Even though it is grayed out at the moment, you can bring it in. Now, we can also bring in some other stuff in here, but before I do that, I'm just going to press dynamic. So you see how this changes straight away, and it's the same thing roughly to what I did with the subdivision or with the divide button. So now that I have this enabled, right, and this is why it's dynamic, you can turn it on and off, and it doesn't affect the actual model. So I'm going to enable this, and I'm going to bring in the apply. I'm going to put it next to dynamic. I'm also going to take this smooth subdivision and drop it here below that. And we're going to leave everything else like it is. We're not going to need any of this because, again, it is very, very useful. You can use this in a bunch of different ways, but it's a different process. We don't need that for this introduction. So I'm going to collapse this right now, whole thing, and we go back to our standard way of working. All right, so the main difference between dynamic subdivision and divide, right, visually is the same, but dynamic only gives you a preview of how things will look like if you were to subdivide them, right? So you see this slider right here. This is how things will look if you subdivide it to 3 times. So if you have 3 subdivision levels, you can push this to 5 subdivision levels. This is how things will look like if you were to do that. Now, what's the main difference, or in which scenario you would use the dynamic versus the subdivision? Well, in something like this, where you actually want to have something that is a very low res mesh, and you want to be able to visualize how things look, you can play around with just the dynamic and, you know, adjust things on the fly. So I'm going to use my move topological and a large brush size. Again, because we have different polygroups and we have different objects, the move topological will respect the continuity. So I'm going to click and drag, push this like so. And this is the great thing. Even though at this level that everything looks very, very smooth, remember the example that I gave you with the horn, that right now we are at subdivision level 5. If I move this, right, it's going to break things quite a bit, or it's going to look very wonky because we're doing it at the high subdivision level. So this is one of the main things, or the main difference, that with the teeth in this case, we have only dynamic subdivision. So even though we can see how things are going to look if we were to subdivide it, so it looks very smooth and clean, we're actually just manipulating the very basic first subdivision level that we have. So you'll see, if I turn this on, I want to bring in the rest of the character so I can, you know, play around with this, maybe stick this around. And this, because I'm not using symmetry in this case, it just becomes a lot of fun to create a bit of a symmetry in this case. Maybe this guy has, like, this tooth is a bit chipped. There we go. But all I'm doing really is manipulating these tiny bits of these fewer points that we have in the teeth, right? Because it is a dynamic resolution. Let's go into solo mode. I'm going to adjust the thickness of this. All right. So just a bit of a adjustment here, but it's very, very easy. Nothing fancy. And the cool thing is that I'm applying this in the lowest subdivision level. That is the key. Of course, once you decide, like, okay, this is kind of like what I want. I'm happy with, you know, all the changes that I did with this creature, and I have the dynamic subdivision. What you can do is simply click apply. So if you click apply, everything that was dynamic is now moved into the actual subdivision level. So we now have 6 subdivision levels that we can go up and down. And it's exactly the same process that we have for the horns. So I'm going to go to the horns. You see, we have the horns at the lowest subdivision level and these as well at the lowest subdivision level. So this is very handy because once you have multiple subtools, just think about this in terms of your future self, right? This is something super basic just so that you understand how things work. But the more time that you spend, even if you use these very basic techniques and these very basic workflows, you can get something that is really, really complex and might end up with maybe 100 subtools, right? So that might slow down your computer a little bit. So it's good to have these subdivision levels, because if I go back to the highest subdivision level, right, so that you can visualize the nice and smooth, clean stuff, when you click to move around, I'm gonna isolate it so that you can see the single subtool. Every time that I move the camera around, you see that ZBrush just sends temporarily everything to the lowest subdivision, right? And when I let go of my camera, it just brings it back. So this is one of the most important things to understand about ZBrush, that basically it optimizes the way that you navigate, even if you have like millions of polygons. But anyway, the point that I was trying to show you is that you can actually bring everything down to the lowest subdivision level all at once. You don't have to click on all the subtools one by one and then bring them back. You can actually bring everything down with this all low or all high. So personally, I like to have that in my UI. But if I have my subtool list open, it's very easy to just click all low or all high. So everything that has subdivision levels will go to the top one or to the highest subdivision, and everything that also has subdivision levels goes to the lowest. So I'm gonna hold the Alt key and the Control key. I'm gonna push this to the all low and all high. So that way I can just go all low and all high whenever I need to. All right, so now that you understand the top pillars of these sculpting workflows, Dynamesh, Series Mesh, and the dynamic subdivision, there is one more thing that I want to show you, which is the Sculptris Pro. This is another fantastic way of iterate and explore things in ZBrush. We're not going to get too deep into it because ultimately it's very similar to Dynamesh. The biggest difference is that you don't have to continuously re-Dynamesh at all the time, right? You just need to change the brush size, and that automatically is going to change things for you. So let me just show you what it does. Again, I'm not necessarily going to do much with it. So let's select the body here. And let's go ahead and bring in the Sculptris Pro. So I'm going to go to the stroke palette. Let's actually dog that stroke palette to the left-hand side now. So stroke palette, let's dog that to the left-hand side here. And you have this section called Sculptris Pro, right? And then you have this icon here and a bunch of things. They're currently grayed out because Sculptris Pro doesn't work with the move brush. So we need to choose a different brush. So just for the sake of this example, I'm going to choose a different brush that I haven't used, which is really fun to play with. I'm going to use the snake hook brush. We can filter by the letter S and then choose snake hook brush by K. You can also filter by K. So snake hook brush, click on that. So this one is telling you that this brush performed best with Sculptris Pro is activated. So very convenient. That's exactly what we're trying to do. So I'm going to click OK. That's it. So right now this becomes available, but it's still not activated. So let's turn on the polyframe. I'm going to get closer here with a larger brush size. I'm going to click and drag, and you see what this brush does. So it essentially pulls things like this, and you can just create a bunch of really cool, interesting shapes, but it is also going to destroy the geometry. So you can use it and then Control click and drag to re-Dynamesh the whole thing. But in some areas, when you pull too hard, you might end up with this mess, right? And this is, I mean, you can fix it. You can smooth this out and just re-Dynamesh again and smooth it out and all of that, right? So it can be fixed. But if you use the Sculptris Pro, that gets fixed without the need of re-Dynameshing anything. So I'm going to enable Sculptris Pro, but I'm going to also bring it into my UI. So I'm going to put these maybe at the bottom here. So Control Alt, click and drag. Let's put it in here. It's a little bit messy, but this is kind of like the idea that you know where the things are and then you arrange them in a way that suits your workflow. So I'm going to leave that one there, and that's it. I'm going to click on that one and enable it so that everything becomes available. Now, these things are important to play around with and to understand what it is, but I'm not going to get too deep into this because, like I said, you can just work with this and it will be more than enough. I'll just mention what they are so that you know at least how to use them, but I'm not going to rely on any of that. So as soon as this is activated, you'll notice that my cursor is now purple. So that is because Sculptris Pro is activated, and I can just go ahead, maybe with a smaller brush size, click and drag. And as I drag, you see ZBrush is dynamically creating topology. Again, it's just triangles because that's the easiest way to generate that topology. But I don't have to re-Dynamesh every time. I can just keep adding things like this and move it like so. And I can keep going. And I can also smooth things out. And when I smooth, you see that the smooth brush is also like an orange color. That is because I can smooth and actually I can remove geometry, right? And it is fantastic because it's kind of like Dynamesh on steroids. It just works by smoothing things out or pulling things, and you don't have to worry about re-Dynameshing. Now, the size of the brush affects the size of these points. So if I go ahead and reduce my brush size quite a bit, and I get closer and I pull this, you see that the points that I'm pulling are smaller just because the brush size is smaller, right? If I increase my brush size, and let's say I pull from the ear, maybe do it with a little bit more. If I pull from the ear, now I'm just getting, the polygons that are a lot larger. So if I smooth this out, I'm going to start removing all of this, right? So that might not be what you want, right? So that is the power of Sculptris Pro. The reason I just left it to, this last bit when I undo all of this is because this is something that I would use to explore concepts rather than refine anything that has a blockout. So if you remember how we started with this character, just using primitives and simple geometrical shapes, we put them all together and then we dynameshed it and then we sculpt on it. That is one very simple workflow. If you don't know what you're doing and you want to start with a sphere, this process is probably the best one because you can explore, you can push things like that, and you don't have to worry about the topology. Okay, so I just wanted to mention that it is there, and it is something that is really powerful, but I would only use it during the iteration process, or like a way to find out what model or what concept I want to go for as an exploration tool rather than a polishing tool. However, having said that, we can combine this with a much more polished process. So the next thing that I want to do and I want to show you is that we can convert whatever we have here in Dynamesh with this character into a nice clean topology that maintains the details. So this is really what I wanted to show you the Sculptris Pro at this stage, because if you decrease the brush size, and we can choose something like the damp standard brush, we're going to get really close here. We can use this Sculptris Pro with a smaller brush size, and we can create a bit of a wrinkle there. Let's see. You see, it's just adding a tiny wrinkle for the eyelid. Maybe it is too close. Let's actually do it here. A slightly larger brush. So I know that you can do this with the damp standard brush and redynamesh all of these. But the smaller the brush or the smaller the detail that you want, let's get into this. You see, I'm just adding tiny points in this area, right? So this is because of the Sculptris Pro, right? I will be able to add these tiny details. So the advantage of doing it this way is that I don't need to increase my resolution of the Dynamesh to, let's say, 1024 to redynamesh the entire character if the only areas that I need to add details are in here, right? So that's not necessarily what I want, so I'm going to undo that. But let's say that we want to do something around here, around the belly area. So I'm going to turn off my symmetry. So I can go ahead and do some kind of like pattern here, right? And those details were not possible with just the Dynamesh resolution that I had. So I would need to increase this quite a bit to, like, say 2000 points or 2000 resolution to be able to describe those details. But because I have a Sculptris Pro enabled, I am adding details and resolution essentially only where I need it. All right. So that is the important part to remember, that even if you're using Dynamesh, you can combine it with Sculptris Pro to add some details, and you don't have to increase the resolution, a bunch of times. That's it. That's the essence of Sculptris Pro. I did want to mention that I was going to tell you what these are. Basically, the SubDiv size changes the size of the polygons, that you're going to get based on the brush. So let me go back to the snakehook brush. So I'm going to increase my brush size. It is very similar to that sort of relationship between the resolution of Dynamesh and the size of the object. So it's the same thing. So right now at 1, if I push this out, this is the size of the polygons that I get with this brush size. If I increase my brush size, I get slightly larger points. But if I change the subdivide ratio, so the size to 0.3, without changing my brush size, and I push this, you'll see I get something very, very similar, right? So that's what it is. I'm going to reduce it to 0.045, right? So now I'm just adding a bunch of points, and really quickly, what I had is now 3.4 million. So be very careful about this. That's the reason why I wanted to stay away from these right now, because it's not needed, but it's very, very specific if you want to do this type of stuff. So let's undo all of that. Let's set this back to 1, which is the default, and that's it. We can collapse this. Alrighty. So the final part of this whole idea of learning ZBrush and understanding the pillars is how to transition between having a sketch, something that is very rough, like in this case, the body of this character, into something that is cleaner and simpler, like what we have in the in the teeth and the horns, right? So obviously it's very easy. If you rely on the information that I gave you, you can just go ahead and click on Series Measure, and it's going to create that nice topology. However, when we do that, ZBrush is going to optimize the topology. This is actually a really nice, topology. So it's going to optimize it. But of course, if I turn this off, you'll see the crevices or any detail that we might have in this area are not going to be visible because we just have a brand new mesh, right? So the only thing that ZBrush is keeping is the general volumes. So my recommendation again would be to work on the blockout first, get it to a point that all the shapes and all the volumes are working together nicely. Then you remesh that, and then you start adding details with the subdivision. However, in this case that we already have some details, let's go ahead and undo that. And by details, I just mean maybe accentuate this a bit more so that it is very clear. I'm going to turn off Sculptris Pro. All right, so something like this. And I'm just going to add these crevices here. And this is purely so that we have something a bit sharper to give you a good example of what this technique looks like. And maybe I'm going to sharpen up with holding the Alt key, sharpen up this bottom lip. All right, there we go. So that's what we're going to live with. We have some details. You could have more, of course, but now we're going to clean this up and we're going to have the details. So in a previous stage of this whole process, I mentioned this undo history, right? The undo history is fantastic because it allows you to go back and forth between what you started with and what you're currently at, but also because you can save a state of the model. So you can tell ZBrush, remember what I have here. And that's exactly what I want to do. I'm going to go to solo mode. And in here, we can tell ZBrush, hey, I want to remember all of those details, all of these crevices that I currently have in this Dynamesh sketch. But once I create my zero mesher and have my subdivision levels and a clean base mesh, I want to recover all of this. So what I'm going to do is hold the control key and I'm going to hover over the absolute last point in the undo history, which is marked with this orange color. I'm going to click on that holding the control key, and you'll see that now that orange point has a wide, hopefully you can see it, but it's like a wide rectangular piece inside. So this is telling ZBrush that now we have saved this current state of this model. So it doesn't matter what we do now, we can always go back to this and we can recover what we've done in here. So I'm going to go ahead and press the zero mesher again with the default settings and a target polygon count of 5,000 and also with symmetry, so that we go from the Dynamesh. You see that this is off now, and now we have a nice clean topology. Perfect. This is exactly what I want. All right. So now that I have this, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the subdivision technique that I also mentioned before. So kind of like what we did for the horns and the teeth. So I'm going to subdivide this a few times to maybe 745,000, right? Because remember, when we had this as a Dynamesh object, was around the 400,000. So as long as it's more or slightly more than that, we will be able to recover all those details. So let's go ahead and turn this off for the time being. So you see, we have something really nice and clean. We have subdivision levels. So this is currently exactly the same thing as the other pieces we have, right? But we don't have those details. If we go to the high subdivision level, it is kind of like there, but it's not very, very sharp. So of course, you can just go ahead and start sculpting and adjusting these. Now that you have a cleaner topology, it's a lot easier. But to recover those, if you spend more time on the details using Dynamesh, we can recover those. So fortunately, we have saved that point with control and clicking on those. So we have saved that point. So all we need to do is reproject those details. So this is a very powerful thing that ZBrush has. So I'm going to go to the subtool palette here, and I'm going to go to project, click on project here. And then we have this project all, project history. These ones do very much the same thing. The main difference is that project all helps you project things from one subtool into another or from one tool into another, whereas the project history allows you to project the subtool on itself because it's projecting the recorded history, kind of like what we just did, right? So I want to hold Control and Alt and bring that project history in here. Again, just because it is relevant to the subdivision level, I like to have it like, close by, and that's it. I'm also going to turn off color. I usually never use that with color, but you can enable color if you want to. And right now, the geometry is the only slider that is enabled. And this is going to be the enabled by default. And what this means is that ZBrush is going to project the geometry. But if you decided to have some polypaint or some texture, you could also project that if you enable color. All right. So with that said, let's go ahead and just click on project history. And now ZBrush is going to look at the previous state, the one that we saved, and it's going to project those details. So we've recovered all of the, the sculpting details that we've done in the previous part. So that is great. And the cool thing is that we now have all of those in a nice clean topology that has subdivision level. So that is how you approach the polishing of a sketch, moving from Dynamesh into Series Mesher and projecting all the details. So I just wanted to show you this to demystify a lot of the confusing information that you might find online. So it's very, very simple. But now that I have this, I'm gonna go ahead and use something like the clay brush. And I'm also going to increase my brush size. I'm gonna hold the Shift key and smooth things out just so that I don't see any of that Dynamesh artifacts in a way. So because now we have like the clean topology or the quads, everything that you smooth should look very nice. So look at this area right here. I can just smooth that out and look super clean. So that is kind of like the last part of the process, or you know, the second last, I would say. Just clean the remaining visible points or visible topology of the Dynamesh, or if you use Sculptris Pro, and then you can just go ahead and adjust things a little bit. So I want to use the clay brush to maybe add a bit of thickness there and continue to smooth that out. There we go. All right, so that is it. I'm going to also use my move brush now. I'm going to go to the lowest subdivision level, increase my brush size, and I'm just going to adjust this slightly so that I can see a bit more of those eyes and maybe bring those forward a bit. All right. So the last part is just to do something about the eyes. Just because this is a simple sphere, I'm going to go ahead and target maybe 1,000 points or 1,500. Series mesh that, and then smooth that out. Same thing with this. I'm going to target less, maybe a bit more, maybe something like this, and smooth that out. Now, this topology that I just created for this sphere might not be the greatest one, so you might just want to stick with the previous one. But if you think it is too much, one thing that you can do, remember, is to change this from the gizmo. So I'm not going to do that because I want to maintain both, but just as a quick recap, you can change this into a polysphere. There we go. So now you have this as a single object. I'm not going to do it. Like I said, it's just going to create that. So I'm happy with this. I'm just going to change this slightly. And I think that is pretty good. It's not a perfect sphere anyway. And then I'm going to subdivide this. All right. Same thing with this. Maybe I need less points. And then subdivide that a few times. All right. So now I can go to the all high and visualize my entire character at the high subdivision level. So this is where it has all the details and, you know, all of the sculpting. And then I can click on all low and I can see that in the lowest form. I'm also going to enable polyframe. And just to wrap it up, something very easy that you can do is render this out to show all the polyframe or the high subdivision level. So that is done from the render palette. I'm going to go to these render passes here. I'm going to take this BPR, which stands for best preview render. I'm going to hold the Alt and Control key, and I'm going to put it in here. So I'm going to click on that, and there you go. We have this render. So when you click on the canvas, it's just going to get out of the render, but this allows you to render things. One last thing that I want to show you before wrapping up. Again, it is relevant, it is important, but it's not going to prevent you from creating awesome, you know, little creatures like this and getting into the flow of learning ZBrush, which is like the material and the colors and all of that. So very briefly, I'm not going to add it to the UI. I'm going to go to the color palette, drop it here on the left, and also the material one, drop it here as well. And the color allows you to essentially choose a color that you want to assign this. So if you want to do like a little devil thing, you can do that. And the material actually allows you to change how things look. So we've done that at the very beginning when we switch, actually, let's go back to white, when we switch between this wax to the basic material, but you can choose any other material that you think looks cool. Personally, if you want to add color, I would recommend that you go with a Skin Shade 4 that has more of a flat shading. It doesn't have that much, let's say, color information in the material. And that is important because if you choose, let's say, a red color like this, and you have a material like this normal one, you won't be able to see that color. Or if you choose this, you won't be able to see the brightness or saturation of this color because it will be tinted or influenced by the material itself. So choose something like Skin Shade 4. So really quickly, just so that we can wrap this up with a nice color, I'm going to turn off Polypaint. I'm going to go to the body, and I'm going to choose a different brush, which is going to be this paint brush that comes with ZBrush. You can load that up as well. And you see that as I move my mouse here, it's going to change to everything, right? That is because if I open up my subtools here, there is this brush here that is the Polypaint. Right now, they're all off. But if I start painting, as soon as I do this, and I rotate around, this subtool has the Polypaint enabled, the other ones don't. So I'm gonna go ahead and just do this, or you can also click on Fill Object, which is here, and that fills that object. But that allows you to change a few things. You can maybe go for more of a orangey tone. And again, because I'm choosing a different color and different tonality, the rest of the subtools that don't have the Polypaint enabled are changing so that you can see. I'm also gonna go all high so that I can create, I have more resolution to paint. I'm just pressing really softly. Hopefully you can see the effect. Actually, let's go for a darker tone, and I'll paint kind of like the bottom, well, bit of the hands, maybe some here for the ears. Maybe we can go with like a bluish tone around the eyes, and a darker, maybe brownish tone for the inside of the mouth. We can go into solo mode, right? And remember, if you want to be very precise, I already introduced you to the mask brushes. So you could potentially mask an area like this, hold Control and click outside of the canvas here to invert that mask. It's the same thing as when I show you the selection brushes, and maybe just paint this a little bit more. And then you can just choose a different color and paint that like so, clear the mask, Control, click and drag, and then you have that, right? So it is up to you what you want to do with the color, but I think this gives you the basics of it. I'm gonna go to the horns, and let's give it a more of a brownish tone or a yellow one. And let's brighten up some of the tips just to create a nice simple gradient. I'll do the same thing with the eyes, with the teeth, sorry, and I'm gonna make them kind of like a yellow tone. And the same thing with the eyes, kind of a yellow as well. Maybe actually do it a bit red, so it has a bit of that redness around it. And then I'll choose a similar color. And this is another thing that I should show you really, that you can click anywhere here, and without letting go of the click, you can drag to choose an existing color. So I'm gonna choose the teeth, and then I'm gonna paint like so. And then I'm gonna select the pupils, go to the black color and fill object. And that's it. So now we have like a little devil creature. I don't know what this could be, but to be honest, I didn't really design this creature. I just thought about things that I should be able to show you with a simple model so that I can introduce you to ZBrush. But that is pretty much it. I'm gonna collapse this and do a quick render like so. All right, so that's it for this introduction to ZBrush. I know it's very basic and it is quite long, but I wanted to be very thorough and show you the core pillars that I mentioned and what it takes to get to that sculpting level. So if you understand these basics, like I said, there's no real difference between this very simple character we created and something a lot more complex. The main difference is just time and optimizing the system and the process. So you've got the basics, right? You have your system, you have the knowledge to create these type of basic characters. And like I said, it's more about the time. So in the future, instead of clicking 3 or 4 things to do one thing, you can optimize it and create like a macro or know an additional technique that allows you to produce the same thing, but half the time. So that's when you start optimizing your workflow, arranging the UI in a way that works for you, not that kind of like messy way that I just showed you in this video. But hopefully this has been of help. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I'll try to answer as many as I can. And this is also just a bit of an idea of what we have within the Ultimate ZBrush Guide course. So that is a premium course. I teach it in a very similar way. So I show you how to customize the UI, is one of the first things that I show you. But we start from even more basic stuff like what a pixel is, how ZBrush came about, all the way to, retopologizing, creating render turntables of an entire character. I cover a bunch more things like nano mesh, what a fiber mesh is. All of those things are in that course. So this is kind of like an introduction to get you comfortable with sculpting. And then if you decide to dive deeper, that course is probably for you. All right, so I'm gonna leave this video here and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.